Good evening, folks. I thank everyone for being on the call. It is a privilege. Kelly, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Okay. All right. As we will get started here, in respect for those who are already on the call, there are still many more apparently coming on. I'm going to go ahead, Kelly, and mute everyone out for a while here so that we can perhaps keep the background noise. It's pretty good right now, but we still want to keep it down, and then I'll get started here. So, all right, just a moment, please. Okay. All right. We will get started. Thank you, Kelly, for helping out here, and for the rest of you all. It is a privilege and an honor to have you on the call. I trust we will go down through a journey of how did we get into composting and some of my story in the manner that we will then end up with probably some question times before this call is over with. So if you do have some questions, feel free to actually, what would I say? Feel free to hold those questions, and then when we open it up, we will entertain some. We certainly are not going to be perhaps able to entertain everyone, but if we don't get your question, please feel free to email in to info@midwestbiosystems.com with your questions, and we will try to address them through that venue as we go. So my story starts, I will likely start it like this, and that is my dad started farming when I was 5 years old, and I still was so young to not understand a lot, but yet old enough to understand how much they really enjoyed being able to get into farming, and that love of growing things was caught on by a very young individual named Edwin Blosser. As we traveled throughout the years, we farmed through the late 60s, early 70s, all the way through the 70s, weathered quite some significant challenges through the 70s. We ended up with some significant, interesting experiences going through the 70s. I can talk about that at some other point. In fact, we'll probably have that some in our book as we go forward. What I would like to relate, though, is in the late 70s, in our economy, the farming went a little bit, how should I say it this way, interest rates went up to 21, 22%. We were caught with a high debt load. We did not lose our farm during that process, but I can tell you things got tight enough that it got grim. And as I look at that misfortune, if you would, really changed my outlook on farming. And here's where my where my outlook came from, and that is, if I can be of asset to the family farm structure in not just surviving but thriving, I certainly would like to pour my life's work into that. This was my mindset as I got into the 80s. My wife and I married in 1983, started working intensely also with my father-in-law. I've been working on our farm with my dad up until that point. My father-in-law was working for some more assistance and had a larger farm than my father. So I had three brothers coming up behind me, younger than I, that also needed opportunity. So I transferred over working with my father-in-law, and it wasn't long after we did that. In the winter of 1984, my father-in-law, Victor, said, "Edwin, there's a way of farming called renewable farming. You ought to get into that. It's very interesting. I don't know that I know much about it, but I think it's something you could thrive in. I'd really like to see what you think." And so he arranged that I went to a 3-day seminar that kind of got me started in Rockford, Illinois. As I came back, there was a lot more questions than answers by a bit. And as I ponder about that, some of those memories are very vivid with me. For example, just what is renewable soil? What does that really mean? They explained it back then as renewable soil farming system means that for every set of 5 years you farm a farm, you'll end up having to put on less to get more. Well, now I like the sound of that. Put on less to get more. And that sounded right to me. All right, if we're going to help the family farm structure, putting out less to get more certainly was something I wanted to be a part of. And so I got excited about that and went off and did a lot of different studies. I started studying under 5 different individuals, not all at the same time, more like in a sequence. But every one of them was kind enough and tough enough to say, look, I'll give you some, but you need to prove what I give you that you learned that before we go ahead. And so sheer need for getting more information, I needed to prove I learned what they were giving me. And that was an interesting way of doing it. I call it experiential training. For example, for understanding how to balance soils, I had to take some soils and actually balance them. For understanding how to get soils to become hard without compacting them with equipment, I had to prove I knew what material to put on the soil to get the soil to go hard. For understanding how to get the soil soft, again, using different fertilizer materials without ripping it or any mechanical tillage, I had to understand how to get that soil to become soft before they allowed me to continue. It was tough. Couldn't learn it all at one time. Many starts and fits. And I guess I'll have to say the leading bleeding edge was I during those 80s. And I will tell you that there were times when I virtually almost despaired. Will I really learn this? Will I really be able to make this happen? And I can attest to many different mistakes. And it seems like as I pause and ponder about this, many years later, well, I guess I would have to say that over 30 years ago we started our training. It's really a wonder that we did make it, and yet along the way we started to achieve successes. And I can tell you that those successes certainly are the reason I'm still in this business. As we learned from our mistakes, and we made many more than lots and lots of people do. My father-in-law kind of, as a guinea pig, if you would, in my training program was a bit, he took the brunt in a couple of years. And I say that kind of humbly because I remember it very well and how tough it was for me to know that part of my experimentation didn't help him any. In fact, it hurt him. Having said that, we had some extremely good success years in those time frames, and I suppose that's what kept us going forward. And it was really interesting. As we got into the end of the 80s, I was able to graduate from some of these training courses. So I ended up from 1984 to 1991 completing a very intensive soils training system. Now, by that time, I knew soil fertility. I knew how to balance soils. I knew how to take soils and get them to produce. I knew that management in the farming system was very critical. We had came up, a very good friend of mine and myself, we came up with the practical principles of renewable farming. And these practical principles were guidelines set for each and every customer. Each customer had to apply them separately, individually, make it happen on their farm, not necessarily the same way their neighbor did. But nonetheless, those principles were what they applied. And as we went forward, we were looking for ever more pieces of information and support materials to continue supporting our customers, so that we ended up with able to help our farmers achieve their goals in even a better way. And along the way, towards the last of the 80s and the early 90s, I heard about these folks over in Europe. And here's what I heard about them. I heard they had this phenomena they called humus management system. Now, folks, during all my training, I was taught that making humus is what you want. And I was also taught that making things rot made things go to humus. That's what I was taught. So my philosophy was the further it rots, the closer it gets to humus. In other words, it was like a single lane journey towards humus. The further down the lane you want, the better humus you had. I find out today that's wrong, but that's what I thought. But what that didn't really necessarily pique my interest necessarily. What piqued my interest was that these folks had categorized over 4,000 different enzymes that certain microorganisms that they were working with produced. And these enzymes were ones that solubilized minerals, made minerals available, that kicked other microbes in gear, that did all kinds of interesting things. As I started to look into what their research was, I really got excited. And here's where kind of the interesting part of my story comes in at. When we look at what happened during that process, I had a bunch of different other colleagues that were going through some of the same types of trainings that I was during that time. And so we kind of networked back and forth. And a couple of us were talking. In fact, one individual out in California and I one night, and I remember very well, I posed a question to him. It says, what would happen if we would go over there and check this out, just really see what's actually happening? Just how are they doing that? What are they making? And for everyone's benefit on this call, to kind of give you some background, by that time we were doing intense research with enzymes and different microbial products. We didn't know anything about live microorganisms, but we did key in on enzymes, and we discovered that those enzymes were very, very powerful. They were not living, yet they were reactive based on what they touched. And so they made certain things happen based on the environment that those enzymes were in. For example, we were able to more than 4 times our money on using certain enzyme growing soybeans. I remember in the one research plot, just consistently we were able to do that with certain enzyme technology. And so we were excited about what is it, this powerful substance called enzyme. Many of us, for a while didn't even understand what an enzyme was. And so as we started building on that and learning about these folks over in Europe, I got to find out what these people from Europe are doing. And so we ended up visiting with several others. And so by the time the summer of 1991 came around, there were 7 of us decided all to go together, and we're going to go over to Europe and take a 14-day tour of a bunch of different things. One of them was we heard that they were making enzymes, all kinds of enzymes, and we wanted to see what they were doing and how they were getting that job done on a massive scale. We also heard that there were people, some of those people were applying this product and getting phenomenal yields. And we wanted to see what was going on with that. Now, at this point, I admit freely to anyone, I wasn't interested in getting into composting. I was interested in knowing what was going to happen to help with our soil fertility business. And that's what we were doing. We were soil fertility consultants by that time, selling some products and consulting and supporting them with their management styles and systems and so forth. And we were excited about our future, and we were really thought we were gaining some. We had by that time we had over 18,000 acres that we were consulting with locally around our own community. And so when we got into this and decided to go to Europe, I went there with a mission. My mission was, how can I help my customer base even more than what I have? And so when we did that, we ended up going forward with our plans got our itinerary together. Everyone bought their tickets. Didn't know even how to travel abroad at that time, never have prior to that. And so we ended up doing that, and as we went forward, we had scheduled to leave February 3rd, 1992. This is in September of 91. And we got into January, and all of a sudden, my colleague in California, his uncle had a heart attack and almost lost his life, not quite. So he had to stop working, and that meant my colleague had to opt out on this trip. There was just some crises that they were in, and he had to opt out to go along. And boy, that disappointed me, but all right, well, maybe the rest of us will get to report back to him. And first thing I knew, and in about a week and a half's time, everyone had backed out except for myself. And so I ended up traveling to Europe alone, which, by the way, was an adventure. And I'm going to say that's an understatement, since I really didn't know how to travel. Ended up having too much baggage since I didn't travel prior to that, didn't know what I needed and what I didn't. And so we had an interesting journey. And I must say that as I went over there and learned of the different things, folks, I visited a research farm that was behind the Iron Curtain for 33 years, secretively. And I got to see some of the research that was conducted. It was pretty amazing. I got to see a whole lot of humus management research places, visited 8 different farms, in fact. Now, let me tell you what I found when I came to these folks in Europe that attracted us to go in the first place. They had a research lab of their own. Fact of the matter is, this gentleman had a electron microscope back then that cost over $100,000. The amazing part of that research facility was not only did they research things of themselves, but they really researched of many different things other people researched. I am told that there were over 600,000 volumes of either books or copies made of books that were categorized. And folks, I walked the aisles, I walked the different places, and I will have to tell you that there were well over 1,000 feet of shelves somewhere around that entire block inside that large building. And so there's just an amazing amount of research that went on in that place. And so it was an amazing place to be. So that was impressive. It was amazing. But what really impressed me was I went out into the field. And, of course, by that time I've had my training. I knew what good soil was like. I knew what good productivity was like. I knew what I was looking for in soil tilth. And I went out there to where they had split off half of the farm. This gentleman bought half of it, and the neighbor bought the other half. So I was perhaps 15, 20 feet from the fence. I dug down. That area there happened to be a wheat field, so I pulled the wheat plants out, and I dug down to my elbow, just with my hand. Very, very little resistance. I had very nice tilth, all the way down to perhaps, maybe not quite, all of my elbow's length. So, I'm going to estimate that we've had probably 15 to 18 inches of depth where we just had nice, mellow, tilthy soil. It was amazing. Man, I said, somebody here in Europe has got some really good soil. We don't have anything like this back home. So what did I do? This gentleman ended up helping me and says, let's go over the fence into the neighbors. The other neighbor, who actually acts, in essence, the neighbor actually, if I can say it this way, he didn't really go for all these fancy things that the research farm was doing. He wanted to stay conventional. And so when I crossed the fence, literally 30, 40 feet from where I dug down, folks, I could not get down more than maybe 2 or perhaps 2.5 or 3 inches with my hand. The soil was a different color. It was tight. It was blocky. It was a soil that would not take a lot of rain into it. if you had a rainstorm event, it was going to run off. It was just an amazing difference. The way I kind of described it is when you look at some light-colored, tough clay soils, that's how the neighbor's soil looked like. It was just very hard to work with. I went back over, and mind you now, this used to be all one farm, one field. And this is 30, 40 feet apart, and I was amazed. I went back into the research lab and started asking questions because they had my attention. By that time, I knew I had caught a ringer, as we say here in the Midwest. In other words, I really thought that, wow, I'm up to something. This is amazing. And so he started talking about his story. And so part of this Edwin story is his story, as I contribute a lot of this to what he was able to help us with as well. His story was he was a medical doctor in the 60s, the guy that had this research lab in Austria, in Europe. And as he looked at what they were doing in medical science, they were addressing symptoms. But how about causes? And he started looking into that. And his causes, as he looked at the causes that he was finding out, were often a lack of nutrition. Some of these diseases, some of these issues were just simply coming from not getting the nutrients the people needed. Therefore, they ended up with the degenerative disease, etc. And so he started researching, where can we get nutritious food? And he did get some. He got his hands on some. But it wasn't just an easy process. But enough so that he found out that higher nutritious food made a difference in the health of the people. It just made a difference. And so he said, well, if I can't help people from a doctor's point of view to get to the cause, then what I'm going to do is start growing nutritious food. So I'm going to start this chain. I'm going to end up with nutritious food. I'm going to end up helping people's health by simply growing healthier food. And he started studying about that and discovered that the connection of the health of the soil will make a difference in the health of the plant. And the health of the plant produces something that makes the consumption of humans consuming it or animals, either one, make them also healthier. And so that correlation of healthy soil to healthy lives was definitely brought together by his research. And I contribute a lot of, and I give a tremendous amount of thanks for what was going on there. And so he decided to become a farmer. And he wasn't a farmer and admits freely that he had a lot of things to learn. But he bought this ground, half of this farm, as I noted earlier, in 1972. Started making compost and using cover crops right away. The compost wasn't anything more than just slightly rotted material the first year or so. Finally got a turner made at a machine shop close by and started making some compost by 1974 and started making quite a bit of compost until 1992. Now, he felt that he wasn't really making a lot of progress. He thought that he was following everything that he could find or get his hands on, and why can't I produce healthier food? So then he discovered there's a gentleman over in Maryland, USA. His name was Dr. Aaron Fried Pfeiffer. And this doctor had studied for over 40 years researching the connection of microbial systems and how can humus be made again mechanically or with the human intervention. How can humus be made fast to replenish what humus is lost in the soil when people actually farm the soil? And so this guy discovered how to make a compost that ended up becoming a humus compost and not just further degraded compost. This gentleman, Aaron Fried Pfeiffer, learned that composting in of itself is good product. It's Its previous plant material or manures or anything that once grew no longer growing and in fact disintegrating, and the opposite of the growing process is being initiated. It's ungrowing. I know Webster doesn't have that name, but it's ungrowing. It's reversing the growth cycle. But he discovered that that's not where the value is. If we can get that ungrowing to happen and result into what we call compost, he discovered there's microorganisms that do not actually break things down. They do not actually decompose. There's also microbes that are found in the forest, undisturbed forest floor where there are some humus deposits. Some of those microbes actually thrive on putting things together. They actually take the microscopic, many little tiny pieces that were broken down and stick them back together in a humus protein. And that's when he discovered the reverse cycle of ungrowing to something that now grows. And that started this process of him researching this well over 35 years as he got into it deeper and deeper. And this gentleman helped our friend in Europe who had the lab over in Austria on how to get started making a special type of humus compost. And as Lupke started, he saw a tremendous amount of change. Now let me give you some information. In 1972, he had documented this by taking soil samples. His organic matter was 2.6%. By 1982, his organic matter was 2.8%. So it rose 0.2% in 10 years. 8 out of those 10 years, they were making compost. 10 out of those 10 years, they were using cover crops. And cover crops intensely, growing only cash crops every second year. So 1 year, every piece of ground had a rest. As they used the cover crops and tilled it back in, they even tried their best to make so that they could recycle their nutrients back in their soil. But by 1992, the same year he met Dr. Ehrenfried Pfeiffer, in the organic matter content, he progressed or made it better by 0.2%. Now, folks, that wasn't neither here nor there to him at the time. This is what he told me. He says, I didn't know. I thought maybe it should have been faster, but I also heard by many people that said that, it just takes a long time. So I didn't really know that. But what he did know was his crops were not as nutritious as they should be. They still were not satisfactory to what he really wanted to get. So now he went on a quest. He found this Dr. Ehrenfried Pfeiffer, studied under him, brought back his technology, brought back his way of doing things, of managing the compost cycle, of managing microbes while composting it, of inoculating the compost with things that do not just break compost down but build things up into humus. And as he started putting that technology, that humus compost, what he called it then, onto the soil, he noticed very, very large changes. One of them was that the nutrient density, the total content of nutrients, and they were measuring them, of fruit, stalk, stem, he was measuring even roots. He noticed an upsurge immediately in the nutrition if you would only talk about the total content of mineralization that he was able to calculate. He noticed an upsurge immediately. And as he started going through that cycle, he increased his organic matter, he increased his porosity, and he started having a lot of fun. Now, folks, in 1992, when I got there in February, there was a soil test taken just not long before that. And I saw those soil tests personally. The organic matter, which this is now 10 years after he met Dr. Ehrenfried Pfeiffer, 10 years, the organic matter had risen to 16.5%. I know that sounds far-fetched, and it's so far-fetched that perhaps this didn't make any impact for you. What made an impact to me was the proof was in the pudding, or I could say in the soil. I got enthused, folks, about humus technology. And I said, if that's how I'm going to get humus by making compost, then okay, I'll make compost. I don't know if I know how to do it, but I'm going to figure it out. And so what did I do? I came back all enthused. I actually, by that time, there was a company making turners in Europe, compost turners. I ordered one in fact, became instrumental in actually getting 9 of them imported. Myself and another individual from America, we together got different things pulled together, and we got 9 of them imported over here, mine being one of the first ones. So I started making compost in the summer of 1992. On June 2nd of 1992, we went back to Europe. There were actually 18 of us from America that went back. And we had a 10-day tour again. And that time we studied under these folks, and they actually had a classroom setting, and we got a lot more intense training. But nonetheless, I say all this to simply say it this way. Folks, I just went through all my training. I knew what I saw was effectively something amazing. And I actually had the experience to know it was, since I knew soils, or I thought I did. As it turned out, today, I would say that I knew a little bit, and today I may know a little bit more, but there's a lot more to learn. And I'm glad for that. This is an exciting frontier. There's just an ever-widening and an ever-furthering onward of what we are able to learn that really makes this very, very exciting. And so when I look at where we have come from today, while I was very excited then, I have to tell you that thousands of confirmations since that time on humus technology have really made a difference for us. And so how did we get into composting? Simply because we were soils consultants and saw this as a tool. Did I have anything to make compost with? Folks, I didn't. I went and bought straw. I think I paid $75 a ton for it back then. I actually bought in. I paid a guy for his dairy manure. I believe I paid him somewhere around $15 a ton for that. Not one little ingredient was free, let alone it had a cost. But I was determined to make humus, and it caught on. There were other people that wanted it. And to make this story kind of wind down for right now, we'll have another call in another month. But as we look at it, we wanted to see some of those compost turners made over here. There were many other people clamoring for what we were able to see on our own acreage and our own farms and what was happening to our customers' farms, because we had also tried to get into making what we call the compost tea extract. And we spent a lot of time and money and got that going and saw that also being very successful. And as we went through that cycle of learning and progressing forward, today I have to say I'm more excited about humus technology than I was when it came home in 1992. Not maybe perhaps on a cloud 9 or 10 or 11 as much as because of the realism that goes with it, as much as I am to say, folks, this is a technology that today we are able to see farmers become more economical as they use this technology. Why? Because over time we see the total fertilizer budget actually come down a little, and the yields increase, and the soil structure and soil health increase, the ability to grow crops without the infection of diseases, without the infusion of insects. Those are the things that make farming fun today. And yes, we have a lot of different farms in America today that are excited about where they're going with their humus technology, as I am as well. It's simply a learning curve and a learning process. And so hopefully this helps you understand how did I get so excited or why did I come with that. Folks, I never had the vision of helping farmers beyond my own community, nor did I have the vision to become a manufacturer like we are today. We are a manufacturer of composting equipment called AeroMaster compost turners, as most of us on this call know. We believe that we have the best equipment simply because we design the equipment so people can make humus with it. We are now in 25 different countries, and as I think about it, in the last 20-some years since we've started manufacturing, I guess I'll just have to say I'm in awe of what happened. It's almost an unreal experience, and it certainly has been a wonderful journey. Not without some regrets, I admit that truly, but with a tremendous amount of gratefulness. I really feel like it was so many different blessings as we got started through this. So that kind of completes my journey, or my story, if you would, and how we got into composting. And so what I would like to do now is, let me just set this a little bit different, the stage here. What I'm now going to do, okay, here's what can work now. If you would like to ask a question, what I need you to do is do *1 to unmute yourself, ask your question, but please mute yourself back again if you could, just to keep the background noise down. Just let's have anyone that would like to unmute themselves if there are any questions, and we'll kind of entertain some questions for a few minutes. Anyone? Again, if you have any questions, would you just press the button *1 to unmute yourself? Any clarification or any thoughts?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Edwin. I've seen you at 2 or 3 other conferences and signed up tonight because I was so impressed about your depth of technical knowledge of composting when you were there at the Denton, the Texas Composting Conference. My question is, if you can, define the difference between humus compost and the type of compost that we were testing temperatures on of various groups at that meeting.
I think that's a great question, and I think I would like to start out this way, and when I have finished, there may be another question that you have, and so I'll entertain one more from you. Here's what I would like to say. I think we need to go back to the basics and make this comment. What is really compost? And here's what really compost is. Compost, if you define what compost is, I think that helps us to understand in a moment what humus compost is, perhaps. We'll try it this way. Think about compost, the word compost, C-O-M-P-O-S-T-E. Now, I didn't say that to offend your intelligence, because I know you know that. What I'm trying to now say is, if you would first have gotten the word composed in your vocabulary, so we had the E instead of the T, it would probably make sense to say that would describe the growing process, composing, one cell at a time, one cell at a time. So first the ingredients of the internal cell, then the extremities of the cell, or you could call it the skin or the perimeters or the outside covering of the cell. Then the bonding takes place between that cell and the others that were already grown. This cycle is called growing cells, or compose. C-O-M-P-O-S-E, compose. If you look at it, the reason we use the word compost is we take what did compose and reversed it. Okay? We reversed that composing process. When we talk about humus compost, that's something different altogether. In a sense, we should use the term compost humus. And the reason I say that is we first have to make compost. In other words, we first have to reverse the composing part. We first have to ungrow things. And that's a disintegration process. It's literally the cells separating from other cells. It's the ingredients or guts inside the cells filling out. It's the skin of the cells disintegrating and separating. Things go down to a very, very small particle, and it looks like dirt. And the reason it does is because the ingredients themselves coming out of the cells are no longer resembling of what it used to be in the cell it was growing in. So that now is compost, and it looks like dirt, and it disintegrated. When you make humus compost or compost humus, it's simply this. We have a microbiology that actually eats those disintegrated cell parts. And as it takes it in, it combines it with other stuff that it took it in, puts a lot spin on a lot more energy source called a protein energy source that it gathers together, and now you have a lot of those small pieces stuck together in a big piece called the humus protein. Now, it didn't get to be smaller pieces during this last part. It got to be less pieces, not more pieces. It got to be larger pieces, not smaller pieces. This final cycle of what I'm talking about in making humus, that cycle of making humus was conducted by simply, and it's very simple, and that is by reversing the compost cycle to the compose cycle. So first the plant grew, we call that compose. Now the plant rots or decomposes, we call that compost or dirt, down to soil-like material. Now it makes humus compost, it's composing again, using microbes that do not make things smaller, but make things larger, bring things together. Everything coagulates together. Now we have something we didn't have when we had the compost. Now we have something that has sustained energy release. It's not erratic. It's not just simply loosely held. It's controlled. It's in a position where plants now can take it. Now, I'm going too far and too fast. I apologize. But hopefully I've made a difference in how we look at compost. It's something that decomposed. How do we look at compost humus? It's something that first was compost and then made into humus. Now, did that help?
Yes, it did. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I guess if there
Hey,
aren't...
Edwin.
Hello. Sure,
Robinson,
go ahead.
Kansas. Are you going to have any other workshop classes before April, like I could attend with some new people?
Actually, that is something that I'm glad for that question. Thank you so much for that question. And that is something I'd like for you to all carefully listen to what I'm saying. Right now, if you get on our website, there's a 3-day class started in second week in April, I believe it is, that will be functioning in Tampico, Illinois. The question is, are we having anything going on before that? Well, quite honestly, nothing is scheduled before that. We are actively working at getting something together that will not be a 3-day class like the April one, but maybe something a little shorter. And I'd like for you to stay tuned as we go forward. I don't know if you guys are on our email enzyme list, but I will just tell you that those are the ways to get those notices out there. And so we are looking at potentially having a couple one-dayers and maybe a day and a half in several different areas. So stay tuned. I don't know if that answers your question. It won't be the hands-on like it will be in Tampico, but we are looking at conducting a couple of short sessions.
How about
That
update on the recipe program to get it to the Windows 10?
The update on the recipe program to get it to Windows 10. We now have a programmer that's working on it, or I should not say working on it, that is studying the way to get this converted. We're trying to get an engineer that, and it's a programming engineer that is looking at it to make that happen. I look for that to become available next spring for the 10.
Okay, I'll call and talk to you more personally on
That's great. Yep, just stay tuned. That's fine.
Edwin,
Go ahead.
Edwin,
Yes.
I came into this conference late. I got in about 7:20. Had you already gone over the importance of clay in making the compost, or is that moving on too fast to the next segment?
It's just fine that you bring it up. Thank you for getting that into this. Yes, we do use clay, and we actually do make it happen from a standpoint of helping those microbes when they make humus. They do need to have clay, and we would like to talk about that in another future session to get into more detail. But essentially, in short, the clay is there to help us cut the volatile losses. And the word volatile may be not clear to our group. The losses of things that like to evaporate out of those cells when they are disintegrating. When we put clay in our windrow, we keep those things from evaporating by making them cling to the clay. And that's all I'm going to comment. We'll get into more detail on that on another call. Not this next one coming up in January, but as we get further into it, I don't remember if it's, I think it's in the February call.
I got a question for you, Edwin.
Yes.
On that farm that was divided in half there, where you reach down to your elbow, how many tons of compost have been put on there over the years? Do you have any idea?
I did ask that question. They did not have an accurate answer, or what can I say? They didn't really keep track as well as they should have or could have. But their typical process was 8 to 10 metric tons per hectare. And if you calculate that out, it would be somewhere, help me here, someone. I think I'm talking about something like 6 to 9 tons per acre equivalent, in something in that area.
And that's over time.
That was per year in his particular field.
So do you think by adding the compost, I mean the humus or whatever it was at the time, that caused a reaction in the rest of the soil to make it go that deep?
Well, I do believe that since I've experienced it for many years since that time. I completely believe that since we saw it happen so many times ourselves, yes. But it obviously starts and then flows downward slowly, if you understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Starts towards the top. But it's an interesting, that whole thing is pretty fascinating. If you really stop and think about it, for 8 years, he made compost and he used cover crops intensely, but he gained 0.2 of a percentage point. And whether he would have doubled it or tripled it, it would have been phenomenal. But folks, I'm telling you now, he 7-fold increased it. So it's a pretty interesting jump.
Edwin?
Yes.
We deal with a lot of highly erodible soils here in the east and alluvial too, and we see a lot of erosion, and I'm a young farmer and I take over a lot of lands that have been abused, and I'm wanting to use the compost. We also have a lot of access to manures, whether it be hog or cow or chicken or turkey. And I guess in another session we'll probably be touching base on all that. That's why I asked about the clay, because that's also a very common element of dirt here in the east of North Carolina and the Mid-Atlantic states. What you expanded upon on the building up organic matter, when we're dealing with literally barren, red clay, gouged, 3-foot deep, water eroded soils, help me understand the composting scenario that you described with the man building up his organic matter. I feel starting from concrete, literally, and trying to make dirt.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the world of having a lot of fun. I guess I would like to congratulate you. First of all, I would like to make a comment. There's one more thing that I really do need to be sure I comment about, and that is when you look at what you just talked about, folks, in building soils, you have to keep it covered by something growing in those soils. And not at one point in time on this call do I ever want to depict the fact that all you need is humus technology and that's it. You need roots taking advantage of that humus. And so if you want to build soils in a very, very simple sense, it's really simple. Get your humus built up and go with a lot of different root growth. You're going to get her done. I know I made it simple, and I oversimplified it intentionally, and I recognize that this is a high management process. All that being said, sometimes just to look at it very simply and then learning that deeply is the way to go. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving input, and yes, we'll go more on that later, on a later call. That is part of this series.
So by putting compost
for you, Edwin.
I'm sorry? Yeah, go ahead.
If the other gentleman is finished, are you finished, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have a question for you, Edwin. Will the bacteria, after the compost is finished, will you have the same bacteria? What I'm hearing is this. I got a two-part question. The same bacteria that is in the compost will go to work on roots and the carbon cover crops. But the second part of that, is there bacteria in the compost that goes to work on that? The second part, is there bacteria in the compost that goes to work in chelating minerals to bring them into a plant available form from the ground? What the ground and the plants need, what your soil is lacking, in other words.
Yeah. I wasn't able to hear you well enough on the first question. On the second question, absolutely it does. Definitely it will. I would say the affirmative is the case. Can you just quickly repeat this last one? And by the way, folks, I apologize, but I have committed to shutting this thing down real soon, and I'm not trying to do that to be rude, but we will have another call in another month, and in the meantime, there'll be plenty of ability. Info at midwestbiosystems.com is how you send in some more questions. And certainly if you would like to have an appointment to have a one-on-one, we would even entertain some of that as well. But, yes, is this Barry, by the way? I'm not sure I understood.
Yeah. How you doing, Edwin?
Good, very good. Go ahead and relay that first part of that.
Okay. The first part was, when you make humus, are the same microbes alive that the ground needs in the humus? All right. You transfer the humus, the compost, to the ground, and what I'm hearing is that bacteria in the humus goes to work to make more humus out of the carbon cover crops and so on and so forth in your soil.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That is correct. You said it correctly. In fact, I'm going to expound on it dramatically in the last call of this series. And that is part of where we come from, and it's the exciting part of humus technology. And thank you so much for contributing, Barry. I need to, out of respect to my commitment to this being an hour call, and we are now at that. So I would like to simply open up everything to to let everyone say bye to each other. And I appreciate everyone's time being on this call. I want to be respectful of that and not just let it linger on, as it no doubt could, and I'd really enjoy it. But I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year, and thank you so much for joining us in the call.